All month, we've been talking about helplessness in our services and my sermons. We all go through times when we feel that way, when no matter what we do, it feels like we can't really do anything about whatever the thing is. Our story this morning reminds us that even when we're broken, or even when our bucket is a little sloppy and spills out a little bit too much water, or when we're down, or when we're weak, we can still bring life into this world. I love that image of the watering can or the jugs as we heard here. That story is told in a lot of different ways, and sometimes it's a broken clay vessel that just cracked enough to spill much of its water on the road along the way. We mean to be watering the garden over there or filling our kitchens over here. And through our flaws, through our holes, through our sloppy edges in our buckets, we wind up growing a garden everywhere we go. While I talk, I want to invite anyone who took a piece of construction paper and crayon to draw a picture for me of that garden in your life. And if you want to get some construction paper, I think our ushers can help you still. If you came forward today with a photo of a loved one, a person, a pet that you lost, you're welcome to draw that garden for them too as a gift. Maybe draw them in your garden. Whether you're a good drawer or not, doesn't matter. This isn't about being good, but being loving. Think about that flower. Think about those flowers. What are the things that you help grow in your life? What are you good at? And if you're not drawing, you can think this in your head still, right? Or if you're feeling on a roll, what are the things that you're not good at that sometimes surprise you and wind up helping the people in your life? While you're doing that, I'm going to keep talking. I'm happy for you to keep drawing them. Sometimes our mistakes can make us feel less than whole, not so good. Maybe we've really messed up. Who here has ever really messed up? Wow. Good company, right? Look, let's do that one more time. Who's ever messed up? Look around, right? Not an indictment. Be wary of the people who have not raising their hands, is what I'm saying. Maybe we feel we didn't try hard enough. When this happens, we can feel like we need to beat ourselves up over and over, as if that was going to make all things right, or make the mistake finally work, or bring someone back into our lives that we've lost, either literally or they just left our circles. All of this is natural and normal. Sometimes we make mistakes and we need to make good on those mistakes. But sometimes we allow our guilt or our shame or fear to start to define who we are on the inside to ourselves, as if the place where the water is leaking out of the clay vessel defines who we are as a person for all times. That's not very helpful, and it usually doesn't make anyone feel any better, right? I'd like to look at what our first principle says about this. What's our first principle? I heard dignity, I heard birth, I heard inherent 12 times. That's great. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. How is it said in our RE classes, our kids' classes? Is there another way?
Each person is important.
Each person is important? That works, right? We often talk about it as a belief statement. We all believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Well, most of the time, we do believe that we must stand on the side of love in our human relations. Every person is deserving of love and compassion just because we live. Each of us are deserving of being treated with respect, even though we don't always succeed in this. The principle reminds us of our struggle toward that goal. It also reminds us that, just like those we strive to support, we too are deserving of respect from others. We too. We fight for others' rights in all our social justice work, and we struggle for our own. This principle reminds us that when folks are treating us poorly for our differences, we do not deserve it. If all of the rough treatments we may be subjected to by others is wrong, what of those we inflict upon ourselves? Who do we go to when our harshest critic and the most unjust judge is no other than us? Sometimes we forget to tell ourselves that our first principle applies to us as well. When we beat ourselves up for the mistakes in our lives, way past any point of helping to make good on them, we're not living up to our first principle. That principle is also an action statement. It's a promise of sorts. We make a promise to each other and to ourselves that will affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity in every person, even ourselves. When our watering can or clay jar has cracks in it, and know that all our clay jars in the world will have cracks in them from time to time, it doesn't mean that we're not worthy. Sometimes we have to find it in ourselves to follow our faith and remember that our flaws do not lessen who we are. I want to tell you another story now, and feel free to keep drawing, but if you want to draw some of the things that happen in the next story, you're welcome to also. This story is about a little boy. His name is Hosea. This is a long, long time ago in a land far, far away, New Hampshire. 1700s. Little Hosea was in a family on a farm. He had a bunch of sisters and a mom and dad. And Hosea loved to be outside all year round. In the wintertime, he would run out in the snowdrifts, jump in them, and climb and make little homes and hills and sleigh. And in the springtime, in the fall, he'd run out with all the leaves on the ground, jump in them after making big piles and making a big mess. But his most favorite thing to do all year round was play in the mud. He would get so dirty. Hosea would make mud pies. I've never eaten a mud pie, well, not willingly. There was that one time that happened. And he would jump in it, and he would splash, and he would get his boots dirty, and his clothes dirty, and the mud would go over his hair. And Hosea would sometimes not do it fast. Sometimes he would go into the mud and put his feet in it, his toes, very slowly, and watch the mud bubble up between his toes and cover them. So he'd be covered from toes to head. And this would go on, and he'd come home every time, and his sisters, this is back in the 1700s, would be forced to wash him. And Hosea didn't like being washed. He didn't like having to go in a tub and have water, probably cold, because his sisters were a little not happy about having to wash him either. Poured over his head, and all threw over to clean him. And he would, after a while, his sisters kind of got fed up with this and went to mom and dad and said, "Dad, tell Hosea to stop playing in the mud." And dad would go back to Hosea and say, "Hosea, stop playing in the mud." And Hosea would say, "I'm sorry, Dad. Are you angry with me?" And Dad would say, "Well, Hosea, I'm not angry with you. I am a little disappointed." Has anyone ever heard that one before? 3 of us in the front. And Hosea would try harder for a while. He'd go out, and he wouldn't intentionally jump in the mud, but he'd go out and do working with the chickens and the horses, and it would get him a little dirty, and on his way home, he might get a little muddier, or he would occasionally kind of slip or fall, and it would just pile up after a while. And he would come home pretty muddy, not as bad as before. There was no toe-growing mud, right? He tried, but he wasn't very good at it. And his sisters would be forced to wash him again. And they would go back to mom and dad and say, "Dad, Hosea's getting muddy again. Will you please tell Hosea to stop getting muddy?" And Hosea's father would go back to him and say, "Hosea, stop getting so muddy." And Hosea would say, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll try harder. Are you angry with me?" And his father would say, "No, Hosea. I'm a little disappointed, but I'm not angry with you." And time would go on, and Hosea grew up. And Hosea grew up learning to ask more and more questions. All that curiosity in the world that got him playing in the mud and in the leaves and in the snow taught him to ask how things work and why things work. And his family at the time were Calvinists. And this was a time in their history when the belief was that only a certain number of people, after they died, would go to heaven, and the rest would go to hell. And Hosea, as an adult, asked his father, who was a preacher, "Dad, if God's all loving, why would anyone ever be sent anywhere but heaven? And his father didn't have an answer to that. And he asked, if people do good things, why would something bad happen to them after they die? And his father didn't have an answer to that. And then his father asked his son, Hosea, why do you believe that God might send bad people to heaven? And Hosea said, well, Dad, I learned it from you as a kid. You said that sometimes we get dirty in the world, sometimes we make mistakes, and you're not angry with us. You might be a little disappointed, but it's always about trying harder, to living a better life. It doesn't matter how muddy you are. Who's ever come home with muddy feet? This is suburbia. This is more common out here than the city.
Well, actually,
What happens? Do our parents still love us? Yeah? You can call it out, yeah?
I hope.
Even if our carpets might hate us, right? Does it mean that running around and ruining things with mud is okay? No? You can shake your heads, no? Okay. We have to try our best not to make those mistakes, right? But the mistakes don't mean we're not loved. They don't mean we've lost who we are. We still have worth. We find dignity in how we handle our missteps. Little Hosea also had another belief, or lesson he learned. This was about what happens when we die. All those photos we have on our memory table are pictures of loved ones who are no longer with us. None of us really knows what happens after we die, but many people have many different beliefs. For little Hosea, his faith taught him that God is all-loving and that all of us are inherently good despite our mistakes, that heaven is a place we all go to someday. Historically, this belief was central to what the second U in our name means, universalism, that all people universally are worthy of love and salvation. Over time, the lines around this belief have gotten a little bit fuzzy with each new generation, but the core of the teaching is still important and healing. We all make mistakes. We all get our feet muddy, and still, we are loved. Life is sacred despite our shortcomings. No matter what the state of cleanliness of our toes, we can always come home.